Hi everyone, if you like what I do, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and consider checking out my Patreon. Enjoy the video. Since its inception, the sport of anti-gravity racing has had a long and tumultuous history, incorporating controversy, industrial rivalries, and even criminal investigations. It also quickly became the world's most beloved sport, spawned powerhouses of technological advancement, as well as contributing to a lasting world peace. For almost 200 years, AG racing was not merely a sport fawned over by die-hard fanatics, but a significant expression of human culture, and a technological leap that finally pushed the world into the future. Having been fascinated by gravitational physics from a young age, Pierre Belmondo, future pioneer of anti-gravity mechanics, would become disillusioned with his present studies and drops out of university in 2021, choosing to follow his first love by joining the Foundation for European Anti-Gravity Research. Although being considered an average student during his school years, Belmondo would prove himself again and again in his chosen field, so much in fact that he would be appointed director of the foundation a mere 3 years later, at the young age of just 21. However, whether this was actually due to his own merit or a ploy by the company is up for discussion, given that only a few months later, the World Technology Symposium ends the World Anti-Gravity Research Congress, the parent organization of Belmondo's foundation, effectively putting a halt to all anti-gravity research across the globe. However, despite his relative inexperience, Pierre was not about to have his dreams crushed by bureaucrats and continues his research regardless, fighting tooth and nail for the next 10 years to keep the project funded, until finally on the 14th of April 2035, Belmondo himself successfully pilots the prototype craft NX-1000 over the Nevada desert. After all of his struggle, the dream of anti-gravity travel could now be a reality. Over the next few years, new companies would race to take commercial advantage of the groundbreaking technology, including Belmondo himself, establishing AG Systems as a commercial subsidiary of the Foundation for European Anti-Gravity Research, with Belmondo himself at its helm. Unfortunately, he was an engineer at heart, and not cut out for the work of a CEO, and a mere 2 years later Belmondo is forced to sell his company to a Japanese consortium, allowing one of the first startup AG companies, Federal European Industrial Science and Research, FESA, to become Europe's leading name in anti-gravity technology. Not to be forced out of the loop, Pierre spent the next 2 years considering how to revolutionize his own AG technology, with other companies already cornering the markets of mass travel and personal transit. In 2044, Belmondo seized his chance when a pair of Brazilian companies merged to found the Anti-Gravity Foundation, who began looking for innovative new uses for the technology. While watching outmoded F1 racing, Pierre is hit with an idea that he cannot believe that anybody has not capitalized on already: the idea of AG racing. Pitching the idea to the AG Federation's parent company, Piranha, the executives are stunned by the idea, and fearing the risk of the idea leaking, the Anti-Gravity Race Commission, subsidy of Piranha Corps, is set up within the year, with prominent celebrity Dirk Breakwater as its chief executive, in an attempt to capture mass market appeal. Over the next few years, companies would rush to construct AG race vehicles, ready for the championship's first season. The rapid change in direction causes dissent in many corporations, including Belmondo's original company, AG Systems, where a feud between top-level employees leads to the dismissal and eventual founding of 2 more parties fixed on the upcoming championships. Finally, in 2048, just over a decade since the first AG flight, the inaugural AG Racing Championships commence in Nova State City, hosting teams from the 3 big names in AG developments, FESA, AG Systems, and Piranha, as well as the 2 newcomers, Aircom and Quirex. Anti-gravity racing was nothing like the public had ever seen. It was fast, brutal, and most importantly, entertaining. It was not only the first form of racing to regularly exceed 400 km an hour, but also the first to actively incorporate weapons into the mix to slow and damage opponent craft. Truly, this was a next-generation sport, but not everyone agreed with its cavalier nature, including Pierre Belmondo himself. Due to the fact there were not yet any custom-built AG racing tracks, courses were created using city streets and pre-existing infrastructure, like many classic racing events had of the past. However, due to the nature of the sport, the hosting city experienced significant damage to buildings and roadways. As a result, the F3600 League is created in 2050, standardizing all aspects of the sport with custom-built tracks, and commences in 2052. Unfortunately, the producers of the sport, Piranha, are bought out and entirely pull out of AG Racing, allowing the sport to go on as its own entity. Other than this, the league goes on smoothly enough until 2056, when it experiences its first race-related fatality, in the form of AG Systems pilot Daniel Chang. In light of this, the league is suspended pending safety investigations, and isn't started up again for 2 more years. For the next 12 years after its return though, the league would only grow in popularity and become the primary focus of many corporations, including a rebranded Piranha, now named Piranha Advancements, who were forced back into the race from fear of being outcompeted by their rivals, something that was much more serious than it had ever been due to the domination of independent corporations over entire governments. To lose a season of a race could mean disaster for a nation. The league was met with more tragedy in 2062, when Dirk Breakwater died, replaced with AG pioneer Chuck Hoffman as executive director. Hoffman in return was killed at the opening of the 2080 season, causing the entire season to be cancelled. Investigations into what was concluded to be an assassination were not forthcoming. Word of mouth, however, speculated that the Overtel Corporation, known to be ripe with corruption and parent company of Quirex at the time, had commissioned the assassination to gain control of the AG Racing Commission in order to completely commercialize it for their own ends. Fortunately, Pierre Belmondo himself is announced as executive director and expels anyone found to have any connection with Hoffman's death. Now, as one of his first acts in the new position, Belmondo announces that after almost 30 years of the F3600 League, AG Racing is evolving, and announces the F5000 League, with vastly upgraded ship specifications, track complexity, and weapons that are now capable of destroying opposing craft. Opening in 2085, the F5000 League, despite its arguably more dangerous nature, continued relatively smoothly for another 30 years, and could be considered to be the golden age of AG Racing. Several new contenders entered the league in the form of new companies, Goteki 45, Icarus, and Asagi Developments. It is during this league that Pierre Belmondo resigns as executive director, turning his attention to preserve the purity of AG Racing and the sensible use of anti-gravity through the formation of the Belmondo Foundation. Again, the sport was rejuvenated in 2116 with the start of a new F7200 league, hosted in a single mega-city, unlike its 2 immediate predecessors, and again the league proceeded smoothly under the watchful eye of the Belmondo Foundation. However, in 2127, at the impressive age of 123, Pierre Belmondo passed away, mere hours after seeing the birth of his great-great-granddaughter Natasha. In honour of the father of AG technology, AG Racing League races were held on classic tracks from the F3600 and the F5000 leagues. However, with his passing, the Overtel Corporation made its move almost immediately, and by 2132 had gained complete control over the AG Racing Commission, and in doing so began the darkest era of the Anti-Gravity Racing League. After taking complete control of the F7200 Commission, Overtel declared Quirex as an independent entity, distancing themselves from the race team so it could evade any connection in what was to come. During the 2137 season, the Goteki 45 headquarters is bombed, forcing them to withdraw from the league. In 2140, Icarus founder Bernston Burns dies, and Icarus shuts down in its entirety. Later in 2149, Quirex, previously under Overtel control, is taken over by Tigron Enterprises, a facet of a Russian criminal syndicate who had previously overthrown the country's government. Finally, in 2150, Overtel announces the upgrade of the league to the F9000, which would see the most drastic changes in AG racing in its entire history. Despite it taking almost 70 years, Overtel had finally achieved what it had wanted since they were implicated in the assassination of Chuck Hoffman. AG racing was theirs to control, and drain for every last penny it was worth. By systematically eliminating their competitors through the most underhanded and illegal of ways, Overtel had achieved market dominance, while their team still competed in the race. If Quirex met an opponent they couldn't beat, the opposing team would mysteriously disappear, or their company would be liquidated out of nowhere. The official word is that Quirex was taken over by Tigron due to financial trouble, but more likely is that the profits were siphoned off from the puppet corporation by Overtel, and the organisation had been promised to the criminal Tigron, who Overtel was clearly in league with, when they were no longer of use. Regardless of their means, Overtel could now do whatever they pleased with AG Racing, and as if to add insult to injury, the original innovators of the sport, AG Systems, would go bankrupt a few years after Overtel's rise to power. Despite their best efforts though, competing companies continued to rise, including Van Uber, EGR, and G-Tech, who would make their coming league very difficult for its corporate overlords. In 2156, the new F9000 League commences, now officially named the F9000 International Federation of Anti-Gravity Racing. At first, all goes as Overtel desires. Public response to the amped-up nature of the race is extremely positive, and profits are at an all-time high. As far as the general public knows, the new changes are even endorsed by the Belmondo Foundation, with the now-grown descendant of Piero Belmondo, Natasha, taking part as a pilot herself. Soon though, the cracks begin to show, with the formation of the Anti-Gravity Purity Coalition in 2162, a group made up of AG racing purists dismayed at the drastic changes to the sport, including convoluted track layouts, excessive speeds, and the overuse of high-powered weaponry. The sport's woes would only be compounded a mere 2 years later when a section of underground track at Temtesh Bay collapsed, killing 6 pilots and trapping many others for several days. Investigations into the disaster concluded it was caused by the introduction of high-powered super missiles into the race. Despite this, the league was not halted, and seemingly no repercussions were felt by Overtel. As a result of this, 3 pilots subsequently withdrew from the league entirely in protest. As the years rolled on, incidents continued to occur, and suspicions grew among the teams and viewing public alike. So much to the extent that Aircom pulled out of the sport altogether in 2168 over league policies. Finally, in 2170, the years of incidents and allegations came to a head when the Anti-Gravity Purity Coalition finally gained sufficient evidence to go public against the F9000 League and Overtel, releasing documents exposing the corruption rife within the sport, the illegal undertakings by Overtel, and their connections with criminal organisations. In short order, the whole F9000 League is suspended, and Overtel headquarters are raided by federal officers, with several high-profile arrests taking place. Just like that, almost a century of fraudulent practices was brought to an end. However, the Purity Coalition did not anticipate the scale of ruin the collapse of AG racing would bring about. Even now, few people appreciated how deeply ingrained the sport had become in both culture and economics. Almost overnight, the global economic market crashed, entire governments were toppled, and large-scale riots ensued. While some companies would barely survive, either by mergers or refocusing their resources, most would not last, with a few re-emerging only after the ensuing economic depression had passed an entire decade later. The massive depression of the 2170s would leave a lasting impression on the world. The underhanded practices of Overtel had become a distinct warning against future hubris. Eventually though, the economic situation would begin to stabilise, and the public would start to recall the classic years of AG racing. Amateur enthusiasts would begin restoring old racing craft, and by 2182, casual events would be held on makeshift circuits embodying the spirit of the old F3600 and F5000 leagues. A renewed interest for the sport explodes, and in 2185 an amateur racing tournament is held in Nevada to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Piero Belmondo's first anti-gravity flight. The event is a massive success, with pilots gaining sponsors from many original race contenders, including a reformed AG Systems. By far the biggest and most well-received announcement of the event is by Natasha Belmondo, now director of the Belmondo Foundation, where she reveals the creation of the FX150 Amateur League, an official AG racing league for fans of the sport, by fans of the sport. The league is by far one of the most successful to ever occur, with pilots and sponsors flocking to participate. After 10 years, the FX300 Professional League is announced, after corporate sponsors voicing a desire to field their own teams. It was to be the first time AG racing had taken place professionally in nearly 30 years. In 2197, the first FX300 League started, occurring in a single location as some classic leagues had, the artificial island of Makana. Concerns were abound about the future of the sport, with many fearing it would fall into the same traps it had in the past. But over the 10 years of the new and mostly controversy-free league, concerns began to abate. Due to the league's sheer popularity, tracks outside Makana were constructed, and a transition league was announced. The FX350 League, where teams could compete on the new tracks and try out prototype ships, lasted until the FX400 League would begin in 2207. Beyond this, it's relatively unknown what happened to AG racing as a sport, but despite its role as a tentpole for global economy and technological innovation, there were still problems all across the world. Problems of pollution and climate change had not just gone away, and humanity would eventually be forced to leave behind not just AG racing, but the planet itself, expanding out into the solar system, using the technology Piero Belmondo had pioneered centuries previously. As they always had though, humanity would feel the need for an adrenaline-laden sport, and AG racing would rise once again to capture the attention of people throughout the solar system.